I'm Elena. I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined that my own siblings, my blood, would look me in the eyes one day and treat me like a stranger. Like I was someone who didn't belong in the family anymore. That's the damage my stepmother did. Slowly, silently, and with the precision of a surgeon, she turned the people I loved most against me. But she wasn't as perfect as she wanted them to believe. No, she had secrets. And eventually, those secrets dragged themselves into the light, one by one. If you've ever experienced something like this, comment below and subscribe. You're not alone. To understand how all this began, you have to go back to the day I first met Camille. I was 10. My mom had died 2 years earlier in a car accident that shattered our family. My dad, a strong and warm man who once spent hours building snow forts with us in winter, had become a husk. He was there, but not really. He'd sit in the dark sometimes and stare at the TV with the volume off. He forgot birthdays. He burned toast. He cried in the shower, and then, one afternoon, he introduced us to her, Camille. She had soft honey blonde hair, always tied back into a braid that looked like it had been spun from silk. Her voice was soothing, like a lullaby, and she brought cookies that she claimed were homemade, but I later found the same exact packaging in her car trunk. Still, she smiled and patted my head and told me how pretty I'd be when I grew up. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. Camille moved in 3 months later. The transition happened like most things she did, carefully crafted, well-timed, and impossible to stop once it began. At first, she seemed like the answer to our broken family. My dad started shaving again. My twin brothers, Max and Liam, who were only a year younger than me, took to her quickly. She played board games with them, bought them matching bikes, told them bedtime stories. And when she did, they glowed. It was like the light had come back into the house, except it hadn't come back for me. From the start, Camille treated me differently. She was never cruel outright, not in a way you could point to. She was subtle, strategic. She'd pour cereal for the boys and forget mine, then giggle and say, "Oops. Elena's so quiet, I didn't even see her." Or she'd plan a weekend zoo trip and casually mention it at dinner, after it had already happened. When I told my dad how I felt, he rubbed his eyes like I was giving him a migraine. "Elena, she's doing her best." We all are. But I wasn't imagining it. Over the years, it got worse. By the time I turned 13, I had learned to hide in the corners of my own home. Camille would talk to the boys like they were her sons, her smart boys, her little men, and she began correcting me in front of them. If I offered an opinion, she'd hum dismissively. If I wore something new, she'd arch an eyebrow and ask if I'd gotten into her closet by mistake. Once, at a parent-teacher conference, my English teacher told her I was one of the most gifted writers she'd seen in years. Camille smiled and said, "That's nice, but she's not much of a people person, is she?" As if it was a joke. As if I wasn't sitting right there. My dad? He laughed awkwardly and didn't say a word. And my brothers? That was the hardest part. Max and Liam had once been my shadows. We built Lego kingdoms together, made forts with bedsheets, and swore we'd live in the same house forever when we were adults. But under Camille's influence, they began to drift. Slowly at first, then sharply. By high school, they barely spoke to me unless they had to. Camille controlled every holiday, every family event, every decision in the household. My dad handed her the keys without realizing it. And by the time I was 17, I was just a guest in my own home. I left for college the moment I graduated. I got a partial scholarship, took out loans, worked at the campus bookstore, and never asked for a dime. I visited for the holidays, but it was always awkward. My room had been turned into Camille's craft space by then. I slept on a pull-out mattress in the guest room. The twins, both in community college at the time, barely looked up from their phones when I walked in. I told myself I didn't need them, that I was better off building my own life. And I did. I became an editor at a mid-sized publishing firm in the city. I rented a small apartment with cracked tile but great light. I even fell in love once. For a while, But something still ached, because no matter how strong or independent you become, there's a part of you that remembers what it felt like to be loved by your family. And a part of you that still wants it back. So when my father called me out of the blue and said he wanted all of us together for his 60th birthday, I agreed. "I miss you, sweetheart," he said on the phone, his voice gravelly and older than I remembered. "Let's be a family again." That word family hit me like a brick. I drove up the night before the party. The house looked the same on the outside, but inside, everything had changed. Camille greeted me with a tight smile and a glass of wine. "Still drinking dry reds, I assume?" she asked. I hadn't had wine around her since I was in high school, but she remembered. That scared me more than if she'd forgotten. Max and Liam were already there, and now in their 30s, both had become carbon copies of the man Camille wanted them to be. Business casual, polite but distant, always checking their phones, laughing too loud at her jokes. We made small talk. I helped set the table. I smiled when I had to, but inside, I was crumbling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered downstairs to grab a glass of water and saw light coming from Dad's office. The door was cracked. I heard voices. Camille's voice. Low. Firm. "She doesn't need to know about the trust," she said. "It's not like she's ever been part of this family the way the boys are. She won't even notice it's missing." My blood ran cold. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. My father's voice was weak in reply. "I don't want to lie to her." "It's not lying," Camille said. "It's protecting what's ours." I didn't hear the rest. My ears were ringing. My stomach turned. I stumbled back to my room, heart pounding. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened, but something had changed inside me. She was hiding something. Something about the trust. About money. About me. And suddenly, the years of manipulation, of cruelty, of distance, it all made sense. Camille hadn't just wanted me out of the way emotionally. She wanted me gone financially, too. And the worst part, my father had let her. I couldn't eat breakfast the next morning. The smell of Camille's cinnamon French toast, something she used to make every Saturday for the boys, turned my stomach. I sat at the table, pretending to scroll through my phone, while my father flipped through the newspaper like he hadn't just betrayed me the night before. Max and Liam were already halfway through their plates, laughing about something on their phones. Camille flitted around the kitchen in a pale blue blouse and pearl earrings, humming to herself, the picture of serenity. And oh, one noticed that I hadn't touched a bite, and oh, one noticed that I wasn't okay. But I noticed everything. I watched Camille brush invisible lint off my father's shoulder with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I watched Liam get up and kiss her on the cheek before heading outside to take a call, and Max crack a joke that made her laugh too hard. I watched my father look at her like she hung the stars, and I thought, she won, she'd done it. She had taken a grieving man and two vulnerable boys and reshaped them into her own little kingdom. I wasn't part of it. I had been exiled before I ever knew there was a coup, but last night, that changed things. Now I had a weapon. A truth, hidden like a blade beneath soft linen. Camille had lied. She had stolen. And somehow, she had convinced my father that I didn't deserve to know. I didn't say anything that morning. I couldn't. The betrayal sat in my throat like a hot coal, burning my words away. Instead, I waited. I cleaned up my plate, still full, and offered to help with the party decorations. Camille beamed and handed me a list. "You've always been so good with detail, Elena," she said sweetly. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I smiled back and took the list. If I was going to take her down, I couldn't afford to lose control. That afternoon, the backyard transformed into something out of a lifestyle magazine. White folding chairs, strings of fairy lights, catered platters arranged on polished wooden tables. Camille spared no expense, which was ironic considering how she talked about being practical with my father's finances any other time I'd visited. Guests started arriving around 4 p.m., aunts, uncles, distant cousins. Some people I hadn't seen in a decade. They hugged me politely, told me how grown-up I looked, and asked if I was still doing something with books. publishing, editing, novels. But sure, books. I drifted through the crowd like a ghost, watching everyone toast Camille for organizing such a beautiful event. My father gave a short speech, his voice stronger than it had been in years, and thanked his amazing wife, Camille, for bringing this family together. Everyone applauded, everyone but me. After the applause died down, Camille took the mic with graceful ease. "I just want to say how proud I am of our family," she said, her voice sweet and strong. "Raising Max and Liam has been the greatest joy of my life." And Elena, she turned to me with a smile so fake it made my skin crawl. "Thank you for coming home. You've always been such an independent spirit." The crowd murmured approvingly. A few clapped. I clenched my fists behind my back. "Now," she continued, "I know my husband doesn't like surprises, but this one is just too good to keep to myself." She held up a small black folder. My breath caught. "This is the paperwork confirming that the trust, established by my dear Harold, is officially being transferred into the stewardship of our sons. It's symbolic, of course. A gesture of faith. They won't access it fully until a later date, but this is our way of passing the torch." The applause was thunderous. I stood there, frozen. No one noticed I was silent. No one noticed the acid crawling up my throat. I looked at my father. He was nodding, smiling proudly. Max and Liam high-fived each other. Champagne glasses clinked, and I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. This was erasure. Camille had rewritten the story of our family so effectively that even the memory of my mother, my real mother, had been swept under the rug. No mention of her name. No photo of her in the house. No acknowledgement that I, her only daughter, was standing right there watching it all happen. I left the party early, and no one stopped me. I walked back to my childhood bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the chipped paint on the walls and the yellowing photos still taped to the mirror. My mother smiling at the beach. Me in a tutu. Max and Liam holding popsicles with blue lips. A family that no longer existed. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I grabbed my overnight bag and began to pack. Halfway through folding my sweater, I heard a knock at the door. Camille. She stepped inside without waiting for me to answer. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "I have work tomorrow," I replied coldly. She walked in slowly, surveying the room. "You know, I always thought you'd want to be a part of all this someday. The trust, the legacy. But you've always been so distant." "Distant?" I said, my voice flat. "Yes. Detached. You made your choice a long time ago, Elena." "I didn't choose anything," I snapped. "You isolated me. You lied. And now you're stealing from me." She blinked, feigning innocence. "Excuse me. I heard you. Last night. In the office." Something shifted in her eyes, just for a moment. Then, she smiled. "I see. So you were eavesdropping." I was walking to the kitchen. She took a step closer. "You don't understand the full picture. You never did." Harold and I discussed everything at length. Legally, morally, emotionally, what's been done is entirely justified. Justified? I laughed bitterly. "You've been manipulating him for decades. You turned my brothers against me. You erased my mother." Her smile vanished. "You will not speak to me that way in this house," she said, her voice cold now, brittle and sharp. "This house was hers before it was yours," I replied, my voice rising. "And that trust? Half of it was meant for me." "I know it. You've kept secrets long enough. And I'm going to find out exactly what you're hiding." Camille's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You did." She left the room without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks of the house I'd grown up in, now a stranger to me. My mind raced. I needed evidence. Documents. Records. Something to prove what Camille was hiding. Something to undo what she'd done, and I knew where to start. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, I left. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. I had no legal training, no background in estate law, but I had determination. and a named M.Y. Mothers. I pulled records for every change to my father's will and trust since my mother's death. I waited 3 hours for the clerk to finish copying the files. When I finally had the manila folder in my hand, I sat in the parking lot and opened it, and what I found made my blood run cold. Camille had altered the documents not once, not twice, but 6 separate times in the past 15 years. Each time, small changes. Harmless on their own. But together? A roadmap to betrayal. The most recent update removed my name completely from the trust distribution. But 3 years prior, there it was, my full name, designated as a 25% beneficiary. Gone now. With a forged signature, I stared at the page. And I smiled for the first time in days. She'd made a mistake. There's a kind of silence that follows betrayal, deep, suffocating, and heavier than any scream. That's the silence I sat in the night I returned from the courthouse with the file folder in my lap. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat on the edge of my couch, the folder open in front of me, staring at the truth I'd always suspected but never had the means to prove. Camille had forged my father's signature, not just once, but several times over the years. Subtle changes to the estate plan, all of which slowly carved me out of what had once been promised. Until, finally, my name disappeared entirely. I reread the report from the handwriting expert twice. The conclusion was definitive. The signatures on the latest amendment to the trust, an amendment that removed me as a beneficiary, did not match authenticated samples of my father's handwriting. She did it. She really did it. And now I could prove it. The thought lit something inside me I hadn't felt in a long time, not just anger or grief, but something harder, colder. Resolve. The next morning, I called Sophia, my old college roommate who now practiced estate law. She had a sharp mind and a soft spot for justice, which made her exactly the person I needed on my side. "You're saying she forged estate documents?" she asked. After I laid everything out for her, "I'm saying I can prove it," I said. "And that I have copies of every amendment. The original documents, too." She whistled. "Elena, that's huge. That's fraud." "If it's true, it is. Then we need to move carefully. You can't let her know you're onto her." I hesitated. I already confronted her once. Before I had the documents. Sophia groaned. "Please tell me you didn't accuse her of forgery to her face." "No. Just told her I knew something was off." "Then you're lucky she didn't lawyer up on the spot." "Look, get me copies of everything. I'll take a look, and we'll go from there." That evening, I scanned every document I had and emailed it over. While I waited for Sophia's analysis, I went to work, I ate frozen meals, I pet Oliver, my cat, and tried to sleep through the night. But everything inside me buzzed with anticipation and dread. I wasn't just dealing with a bitter stepmother. I was dealing with a con artist who had spent 2 decades carefully building a web of lies, so convincing that even my own father and brothers had been caught in it, and now I was pulling at the thread. 3 days later, Sophia called back. I went through everything, she said, without preamble. "And you weren't imagining it. This is absolutely grounds for legal action. The amendments look shady as hell. Your father's original will from 2001 clearly listed you as a 25% beneficiary. Then the 2009 amendment changed that to 15%. Then 2012, just after your father had surgery, your name drops to 5%. And then in 2019, you're gone entirely." "That's the one with the forged signature?" "Yep. It's the sloppiest too. Whoever did it tried to imitate his handwriting, but they didn't even match the angle of the H in Harold. An expert would spot it in seconds." I felt a knot in my stomach start to loosen. "So, what happens now?" "Well, you've got options. You could file a formal challenge to the trust and petition for it to be reinstated as per the original terms. That would trigger a forensic investigation into all the changes, which could uncover the forgery. If Camille is proven to have done this knowingly, she could face criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse. I sat quietly for a moment, digesting, and if we do this, I asked, what happens to my father? Sophia hesitated. If he's unaware of the forgery, the court might treat him as another victim. But if it turns out he was complicit, or just willfully ignorant, it could complicate things. I sighed. That was the part one hadn't admitted to myself yet, the chance that my father had known. Maybe not the full extent. Maybe not every forged page. But something. A man doesn't just hand over his legacy without asking questions. I don't want to hurt him, I murmured. But I can't let her get away with this. Sophia's voice softened. Then we moved forward. Before she could hang up, I asked her something I hadn't planned to. Could she have forged something from my mother, too? There was a pause. What do you mean? There was a letter. One my mother wrote before she died. I never got it. But I saw a mention of it once in an old family journal. She'd written something to be given to me on my 18th birthday. It never came. Do you think Camille intercepted it? I think she probably destroyed it. Sophia didn't respond for a moment. Then, if it was in the house and Camille had access to everything, it's possible. Especially if it contradicted the changes she was planning to make. That possibility filled me with rage, so hot I nearly dropped the phone. My mother had tried to protect me, even from the grave. And Camille had silenced her voice, too. I hung up and drove straight to my father's house. When I arrived, Camille was in the garden, clipping roses with gloved hands. She looked up, surprised. "Elena," she said, setting down her shears. "Back so soon?" "I need to look through the office," I said. "There are some old letters I want to see. I think Mom left me something." She didn't argue, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Of course. Feel free." I walked into the office, once my mother's, and scanned the drawers, the shelves, the files. I didn't expect to find anything, but then I noticed a small black envelope tucked inside the old art supply drawer. It was half covered by dried-out paint tubes and curled-up brush bristles. The envelope said, "To Elena on your 18th birthday." My throat closed. I opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside was a folded letter. My mother's handwriting. Beautiful and looping. I read it once, then again. Each word carved itself into my memory. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, you're turning 18. And I'm not there. I hate that, but I need you to know I love you so much. And I've spoken with your father about protecting your share of our family trust. It's yours. No matter what happens. You deserve that start, that freedom, that security. No one should ever take that from you. Love always." Mom, tears blurred the ink as I held the letter to my chest. She had tried. She had known Camille might do this. She had left me something real, something I could use. I left the office and walked back into the garden. Camille was still there, trimming roses. I stood on the porch and said nothing for a long time. When she finally turned to me, I held up the envelope. Her face paled. "I found it," I said. "And I've seen the forged documents. I've spoken to a lawyer." "You lose, Camille." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I turned and walked to my car, the letter pressed against my chest like armor. I didn't look back. There's a misconception about revenge. People think it's loud, screaming, dramatic, explosive. But the kind that really sticks? It's quiet, slow. The kind that creeps up on someone in the middle of the night and pulls the ground from under them while they're still pretending they're safe. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I didn't even tell my brothers, not yet, because the truth was, I didn't need to blow up Camille's life. I just needed to loosen the screws point one by one. The first thing I did was revisit the past. Not metaphorically, I mean literally. I drove 3 towns over to visit Mrs. Adler, my mother's oldest friend. She was in her late 60s now, living in a cozy apartment above a florist shop. Her eyesight had faded, but her memory? Razor sharp. "Elena," she gasped when she opened the door. "You look just like Laura." That was enough to make my throat tighten. I hadn't heard my mother's name spoken like that in reverence, with warmth, in years. We drank tea, and I told her everything. About Camille. About the trust. About the letter. About the forgery. Mrs. Adler didn't blink. I knew that woman had her eyes on more than your father. She started coming around barely a year after Laura died. Smiling, bringing casseroles, always wearing pearls like it was a funeral fashion show. I laughed bitterly. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did, Mrs. Adler said. And Laura knew it. Your mom wrote you several letters, you know. She kept them in a folder in her desk. Said she wanted you to have one every year until you turned 21. My stomach dropped. I never got any of them. Mrs. Adler closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Then Camille got to them first. That night, I lay awake in bed, haunted not just by the betrayal, but by what I'd lost. Words from my mother I'd never read. Messages meant to carry me through the hardest years of my life, silenced by a woman who wanted to scrub me out of existence. But I wasn't erased. Not yet. Camille had underestimated me, and more importantly, she'd underestimated my memory. I remembered every detail of my childhood, every family friend, every neighbor, every holiday dinner guest who ever said, "Let me know if you ever need anything." So I made a list. A long one. Then I started calling. "Hi, Mrs. Danvers? This is Elena, Everly, Harold, and Laura's daughter. Yes, it's been a while. I was wondering, do you remember if my mother ever spoke to you about the family trust?" "Yes? Really? She mentioned wanting to protect something for me? Do you remember when?" One call turned into 10. Then 20, and almost every single person said the same thing. Your mother was very clear about one thing. She wanted you taken care of. She told us she was making sure you'd have part of the trust. She was worried your father might be too grief-stricken to manage it later. That was gold. Verbal witnesses. I compiled every statement, every date, every shared memory, and passed it on to Sophia. She was thrilled. "This is airtight," she said. "And if we push hard enough, your stepmother's going to wish she'd never touched that pen." But still, I waited, because I didn't just want legal victory. I wanted Camille to feel the walls closing in. I went to the source. My father. I invited him to dinner. He arrived 15 minutes late, as always. Wore a brown sport coat and khakis, his version of dressed up. Brought a bottle of cheap red wine that Camille had probably picked. And when he hugged me at the door, it was half-hearted, like he was already preoccupied. I cooked his favorite, roast chicken, garlic potatoes, sautéed spinach. It was the same meal my mom used to make for his birthday every year. That seemed to catch him off guard. He sat down, cleared his throat, and said, "Smells like a long time ago." I remember I said simply. Dinner was polite, quiet. We talked about the weather, his back pain, how Max was thinking about changing jobs. I didn't bring up Camille. I didn't mention the letter. I let him lower his guard. Then, over coffee, I asked, "Dad, do you remember the will you and Mom drafted back in 2001? He blinked. "I think so." "Why?" "You left me 25% of the trust." "You both did." His hand paused over his mug. I leaned in. "Did you know Camille removed me from it?" He didn't answer, because if you did, I want to hear you say it. I want you to look me in the eyes and say you were okay with that. With erasing me. His voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" He sighed, rubbed his temples. "Camille said you weren't interested. That you wanted independence. That you refused to come around. That you were angry. That you didn't want to be part of the family anymore." I stared at him, numb. "You believed her." "I didn't know what to believe." "You barely called. You were always gone. Because she pushed me out. Because you let her. You let her turn my brothers against me. You let her fill the house with pictures where I was cropped out. You let her replace everything Mom built with her own version of reality." He looked down at his hands, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Not to me," I said. "Say it to her." He looked confused. Then I pulled the letter out of my purse. My mother's letter. The one meant for my 18th birthday. I watched as his eyes scanned the paper. Watched as his mouth trembled. Watched as he folded it shut, carefully, Reverently, I didn't know, he said. I swear to God, Elena. I didn't know she found this. I didn't know she kept it from you. Then help me make it right. The next morning, my father called a family meeting. Max, Liam, Camille, and I all gathered in the living room like we were about to open Christmas presents. Camille looked nervous. Good. My father stood in front of the fireplace, holding the letter in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. I made mistakes, he began. I let grief make me weak. And I let someone else take the reins when I should have been leading. He turned to me. Elena, your mother loved you. She made her wishes clear. And I ignored them. He handed the letter to Max and Liam. Read it. They did. And, for the first time in years, I saw something crack in them. Guilt. Shame. Recognition. Then, my father turned to Camille. I reviewed every amendment to the trust, he said coldly. And I've spoken to an expert who believes the last one was forged. Camille's face went white. Harold, you can't possibly believe. I believe what's in front of me. And I believe my daughter. More importantly, I believe my wife. The one you tried to silence. Camille stepped forward, voice rising. I have done everything for this family. I raised those boys. I kept this house running. I managed every detail, every dollar, because you were too broken to do it yourself. My father didn't flinch. That doesn't give you the right to steal. She glared at me. You manipulative little brat. You couldn't stand that they loved me more. I didn't answer that I didn't need to. The room spoke for itself. My brothers looked at me now, really looked, and for the first time in over a decade, they saw their sister, not a ghost. Not an outsider to me. Elena, Max said softly. I'm sorry. We should have asked questions. Liam nodded. We should have listened. Camille stood in the doorway, shaking. Harold, she hissed. You're throwing away everything we built. No, he said. I'm restoring what was stolen. He turned to me. The trust will be amended back to the original terms. You'll get your share. And more if I have anything to say about it. Camille's mouth opened. Closed. Then she stormed out, and no one stopped her. Not this time. The day Camille walked out was anticlimactic in a way I hadn't expected. There was no slammed door. No shattered glass. No final, biting remark. She simply picked up her purse, muttered something under her breath that no one caught, and walked out of our family's house, the house she had once ruled like a queen without looking back. What amazed me more than her exit was the quiet that followed. For years, her presence had dominated every room. Even in silence, Camille had been a looming figure, always watching, always calculating. Now, with her gone, the house felt bigger, lighter, as if someone had finally opened a window that had been stuck shut for decades. But that lightness was quickly replaced by something else, discomfort, because the truth is, when a manipulator leaves, the wreckage they leave behind doesn't clean itself up. And the people they've poisoned don't just return to who they were before. Max and Liam didn't know how to speak to me. They didn't know what to say now that the woman who'd shaped their perception of me was gone. We had all changed. And we didn't know how to be a family anymore. The night after Camille's departure, I stayed in the guest room. My old bedroom had long been converted into an exercise room, and I didn't have the heart to ask my father to undo it. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the floorboards, every distant footstep. It felt like being in a haunted house, except the ghost wasn't Camille. It was the 10-year-old girl I used to be, the one who used to sleep in this house with a heart full of hope and a head full of dreams. She was still here, tucked into corners and photo frames, watching me with quiet sadness. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table before anyone else was awake. The silence was comforting, until it wasn't. Hey. I looked up. Max stood in the doorway, hair tousled, face pale. He looked older than I remembered. Not just because he was in his 30s now, but because for the first time he looked human. Vulnerable. Unshielded. Morning, I said quietly. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me. We sat in silence for a long time before he finally spoke. I don't know how to apologize for everything. I didn't answer. I just waited. He looked down into his mug. She got into our heads. I mean, I know that sounds like an excuse, but we were kids. She made it so easy to believe the version of you she fed us. The one where you were selfish, angry, distant, and you believed it. He winced. Yeah, I did. For a long time. I nodded slowly. I get it. I really do. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. He looked up, eyes rimmed with guilt. I know. And I don't expect you to just forgive everything. But I want you to know I see it now. I see her for what she was. I see you. That broke something in me because all I had ever wanted for years was to be seen. To be recognized as someone who belonged. Not just tolerated, but loved. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Later that day, Liam joined us. His apology was clumsier, more awkward, but no less sincere. He kept wringing his hands like a child being scolded. I was just trying to keep the peace, he said. I didn't want to choose sides. You didn't have to, I replied. Camille made that choice for you. My father came in during the conversation, holding the original will in one hand and a manila folder in the other. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but his shoulders were straighter than they'd been in years. I've already spoken to my attorney, he said, setting the folder down. We're reinstating everything. Elena, your 25% is restored. And I've added a clause, nothing can be changed again without unanimous approval from all three of you. All three of us, not just Max and Liam. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thank you. He sat down, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for 20 years. I didn't know she forged my name, he said quietly. I knew she was persuasive. I let her talk me into things I shouldn't have. But I swear, Elena, if I had known, I believe you, I said. And I did. Because the man who sat in front of me now wasn't the one Camille had molded. He was the man I remembered. The father I had mourned long before he died. That week was a slow rebuilding process. Not everything healed instantly. There were moments of awkwardness, tension, silence. But there were also moments of laughter, of honesty, of rediscovery. We looked through old photo albums, ones Camille had stashed in the attic. My father cried when he saw pictures of my mother holding me in her arms. Max and Liam apologized again when we found a family Christmas photo Camille had carefully folded to hide my face. I didn't realize how far she went, Liam said, stunned. She literally tried to erase you. She almost succeeded, I admitted. But I'm still here. And I wasn't just here. I was finally being welcomed. Later that week, we had dinner as a family. For the first time in almost 2 decades, I felt like I was part of something again. My father cooked. Max set the table. Liam brought wine. And I, for the first time, allowed myself to relax. Halfway through the meal, my father raised a glass. To Laura, he said, voice steady. She gave us the blueprint for this family. And we forgot it for a while. But I think we're starting to remember. We all raised our glasses to Mom. To Laura. That night, I stood alone on the back porch, staring at the stars. It was cold, but I didn't feel it. I just breathed. For once, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next blow to come. I felt peace, but peace wasn't the end of the story, because Camille wasn't done. 2 weeks after her departure, my father received a letter from her lawyer. A demand for compensation. She claimed emotional duress, long-term caretaking labor, and even went as far as to accuse my father of breach of spousal financial agreement. She's threatening to sue, he told me over coffee one morning, rubbing his temples. For what? I asked, stunned. For everything. Alimony. Property division. Half of the trust. She forged your signature. I know. But if we don't fight her legally, she could still walk away with more than she deserves. I placed my hand over his. Then we fight. And we did. Sophia filed a formal complaint. We submitted the handwriting analysis. We collected every witness statement, every record, every timestamp. Everything we needed to dismantle Camille's house of cards. The lawsuit was ugly, public, embarrassing, but it was necessary, and when it ended, when the judge ruled in our favor and Camille's claims were dismissed entirely, I finally felt free. Not because she lost, but because I didn't have to hide anymore. I was Elena Everly, daughter of Laura, sister to Max and Liam. A rightful heir. And finally, I was home. When people like Camille lose power, they don't go quietly. They don't crumble overnight. They fray, one thread at a time. Slowly, strategically, in small, bitter acts of control disguised as last words. And when the unraveling starts, it's not loud at first. It's a whisper, a glance, a rumor passed through clenched teeth. That's what the weeks following the court victory felt like. Whispered collapsed. At first, I thought we'd crossed the finish line. That the judge's ruling would be the final blow. The trust was restored. Camille's forged amendments were nullified. My father, finally awake to everything she'd done, stood behind me in full. Max and Liam had made their amends. We'd even begun the slow work of rebuilding the family we once were, but I was wrong to think Camille would disappear after that. You can't erase someone like her in a single moment. Her poison had soaked into too many things. It started subtly. A neighbor we'd known for years, Mrs. Tilly, stopped waving at my father when she walked her dog past the house. A man from my father's bowling league emailed to say he was taking a break from team commitments for personal reasons. At the grocery store, I caught a woman whispering to another in the cereal aisle after looking directly at me. I couldn't hear what she said, but I didn't need to. People were talking, and Camille was still spinning her version of the story. Despite all the evidence, despite the court ruling, despite the handwriting analysis and my mother's letter, she still had people convinced that she was the victim. That I was the vindictive stepdaughter who'd turned a grieving father against his second wife. That I'd manipulated my brothers and orchestrated a legal ambush to steal what wasn't mine. It was absurd, it was insulting, and it was working point one morning. While I was out running errands with Liam, we bumped into someone we hadn't seen in years, Mrs. Jeffers, our old piano teacher. She looked delighted to see him, all smiles and warm hugs. Until she saw me. Elena, she said, her voice cool. Back from exile, are we? I froze. Liam's jaw tightened. Don't. But Mrs. Jeffers went on. You know, some of us thought you'd moved on. It's a little unseemly, airing family grievances in public. That poor woman, she gave her life to your father. She stole from us, Liam snapped. She forged legal documents and tried to write our sister out of the family. Mrs. Jeffers blinked, clearly surprised. She stammered something about not knowing the full story before turning away, but the damage was done. On the drive home, I stared out the window, fists clenched in my lap. Why are people so eager to believe her? I muttered. Even now. Liam didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, he said, because she was always good at making people feel important. Like they mattered. Like she saw them. That's how she got to us, too. He wasn't wrong. Camille had been a master manipulator. Her brilliance wasn't in shouting or demanding. It was in planting ideas, shaping narratives. She never said, Elena is ungrateful. She said, I just worry about her. She didn't accuse me of being selfish. She expressed concern. Maybe she needs space. Maybe she's struggling. It was so gentle that no one saw it coming. Not even me, until it was too late. But now I saw everything, and I had no intention of letting her keep winning. That night, after dinner, I brought it up with my father and Max. We sat around the kitchen table, the scent of leftover pot roast hanging in the air. She's poisoning our name, I said bluntly. She may be gone from this house, but she's still out there spinning her version of events. And people are listening. My father sighed heavily. I thought the court ruling would be enough. She's not interested in justice. She's interested in perception. Max frowned. What do you want to do? Launch a PR campaign? No, I said. But we need to tell the truth. Publicly. Not just in court documents. We need to reclaim the story. And so we did. We didn't hold a press conference. We didn't post dramatic videos online. We started small. Personal. We wrote letters. Each of us. My father penned a heartfelt letter to the Rich Hill Gazette, a weekly newspaper with a small but loyal readership. In it, he explained what had happened from the perspective of a grieving husband who had made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. He admitted his own failures. He named no names, but he told the truth. Max and Liam did the same, letters to the editor, to their workplaces, even to old family friends. They apologized for their silence, for their blind trust. They stood by me, firmly and without reservation, and me, I wrote my mother's story, a full-page essay that the Gazette agreed to run. I included photos of us together, of the letter she wrote me, of the old family house the way it looked before Camille arrived. In it, I told the truth, about my erasure, about my return, about the strength it takes to reclaim what's yours. Not just legally, but emotionally. The piece ran on a Friday. By Sunday, everything had changed. The messages started pouring in. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to say they were sorry. That they hadn't known. That they believed me now. That they remembered my mother and how kind she had been. That they were ashamed for ever thinking Camille was anything more than a very good actress, Mrs. Tilly sent a handwritten card to Mrs. Jeffers left a voicemail, and the bowling team invited my father back, saying they'd missed his steady hand. But Camille, she didn't like being exposed. I found that out the next week, when she showed up again. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd just come home from a meeting with Sophia and was sitting in the living room, drinking tea. The doorbell rang. I opened it. There she was. This time, she looked angry, and more elegant sadness, and more polite grief. She was dressed in black, her hair pulled back too tightly, lips painted a shade too red. She looked like she was trying to armor herself with appearances. But her eyes? Her eyes were wild. You're going to regret this, she said coldly. I didn't flinch. Threats won't change the truth. You think people believe you? You think they care about your sob story? They do, I said. Because it's real. You think this is over? You think you've won. I didn't win anything, Camille. I just took back what you tried to steal. She stepped closer. You think I won't come for what's mine? I didn't move. There's nothing left for you here. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, for the first time, her voice cracked. I gave 20 years to this family, she whispered. And they threw me away. No, I said gently. You threw yourself away when you chose lies over love. Her shoulders sagged, just for a second. Then she turned and walked away. I didn't see her again after that, but I didn't need to. The damage she'd done was real. But so was the healing. It wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. But every day it got better. The family dinners started to feel normal again. The laughter wasn't forced. The stories we told included Mom again, her laugh, her quirks, her recipes. We framed her letter. We hung it in the hallway. A daily reminder of her loved. A daily reminder that even when people try to erase you, the truth will always find its way home. Revenge isn't always about striking back. Sometimes, it's about the moments when the people who hurt you fall apart, not because you pushed them, but because the weight of their own lies finally becomes too heavy to carry. After Camille's second and final visit to our home, I thought we'd seen the last of her. I thought she would retreat into whatever life she could stitch together from the pieces we hadn't let her steal. That she'd vanish into silence, the way so many manipulators do when they lose their power source. But I underestimated her need to control the narrative. A month after her visit, things had finally begun to feel steady. My father had returned to his old woodworking hobby, often spending afternoons in the garage sanding down forgotten furniture. Max was planning to propose to his longtime girlfriend, something he and I talked about quietly over coffee. Liam had started therapy, trying to unpack the guilt he'd carried for being so easily influenced, and me, I was editing a memoir about forgiveness and thinking, almost daily, about how much easier it is to help others process pain than it is to process your own. That's when the email came. It was from a journalist. Subject line: inquiry regarding your family's legal dispute. My stomach dropped. I opened it. Hi Elena, my name is Natalie Crane. I'm an independent journalist working on a long-form piece about contested inheritance cases and elder financial abuse. I came across public court documents regarding your family's recent case and wanted to reach out for your side of the story. Camille Everly has agreed to speak on the record and has made several claims I would like to fact-check. She's also provided documents, though I should note that some have already been disputed legally. I would love the opportunity to speak with you. Best, Natalie. I read it twice. Then a third time. Camille wasn't done after all. She wasn't retreating, she was rebranding, turning herself into a tragic figure for public consumption, and she'd found someone to give her a platform. I forwarded the email to Sophia and called her immediately. She's going public, I said. She's talking to a journalist. Sophia groaned. Of course she is. Narcissists love a redemption arc. What do? We give them the truth. But we do it smartly. We don't go scorched earth. We go surgical. The next morning, I met with Natalie Crane. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s. Sharp eyes, soft voice. She wore a gray sweater and had a notepad, even though she also had a recording app running on her phone. Thank you for meeting me, she said. I really appreciate your openness. Camille gave you a story, didn't she? She gave me her version, Natalie said carefully. But that's why I'm here. To hear yours. So I told her everything. I showed her the court documents, the handwriting analysis, the letters from my mother, the original will, the photos, the erasure, the manipulation. The moment I found the letter that proved Camille's intent, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I let the evidence speak. Natalie didn't interrupt once. When I was finished, she asked one question. Why didn't you expose her sooner? I smiled sadly. Because for a long time, I was still trying to believe the lie she sold all of us, that she was our savior, not our saboteur. And I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I stayed good, things would right themselves. But they didn't. No, I said. They got worse. Until I had no choice but to stop playing along. Natalie nodded, made a few notes, and thanked me for my time. I didn't know how the article would turn out. But I knew I'd told the truth, and for the first time that felt like enough. But the universe wasn't done exposing Camille. 3 days later, my father received a letter from the Ridge Hill Nonprofit Committee, the one Camille had chaired for nearly a decade before she left under suspicious circumstances during our trial. It was formal. Cold. Final. It stated that Camille was being investigated for financial misconduct. That a whistleblower had come forward with evidence she'd been redirecting donations from designated projects into personal consulting fees and undocumented expenses. The amount? Over $80,000. My father showed me the letter, his hands trembling. She used my name on some of the paperwork, he said. As a silent consultant. I had no idea. Do they think you were involved? They don't. Not yet. But they're asking for statements. So we gave them statements, and what followed was a slow, painful public unmasking. Ridge Hill launched a full investigation. Natalie Crane followed up, asking for permission to include the new allegations in her article. The nonprofit community buzzed with quiet outrage, and finally, people started to see her, not as a misunderstood widow, but as what she truly was, a con artist who'd been playing the long game for far too long. The article came out 2 weeks later. The title was simple, The Stepdaughter's Story. It was balanced, factual, but unflinching. Natalie laid out both sides. She included Camille's quotes, alongside proof they were false. She highlighted the forged documents, the erased inheritance, the hidden letters, and the nonprofit scandal. She ended with a quote from me. I didn't destroy her. She did it to herself. I just stopped playing along. When I read that line, printed in bold at the end, I cried, not because it was vindicating, but because it was finally over. The calls and messages came again. This time, stronger, clearer. People apologized. People admitted they'd believed the wrong story. People started to rewrite Camille's role in their minds, not as the graceful second wife, but as a woman whose kindness had always been a little too calculated. But I didn't gloat. I didn't post triumphant declarations. I didn't text her and say, "I told you so." Because revenge, when it's done right, doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence. And that silence is what I finally got. And oh, more letters. And oh, more threats. And oh, more unexpected visits. Camille disappeared this time. For real, we never heard from her again. Fallout has a strange way of settling. Not like a storm where everything crashes down and is done in a day. It's quieter, more subtle. You wake up and the world is just different. Colder in some places, clearer in others. After the article ran, Camille vanished from public life. She didn't issue a rebuttal. She didn't threaten further lawsuits. She didn't speak to the press. She simply stopped, but her silence was its own statement. For years, she'd curated an image so pristine that even those of us who knew better sometimes second-guessed ourselves. But the evidence was out. The mask was shattered. And as far as Rich Hill's social circles were concerned, she'd gone from gracious hostess to polite pariah almost overnight. For me, the fallout came with a strange kind of stillness. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Like I'd been bracing for so long, waiting for the next manipulation, the next attack, the next whisper behind my back, that I didn't know how to exist without the fight. The day after the article dropped, I stayed home. I didn't check social media. I didn't return texts. I just sat on my balcony, wrapped in an old cardigan that still smelled like my mother's cedar chest, watching the wind move through the trees. Oliver, my cat, lay curled at my feet. The sky was overcast. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible, but I also didn't feel whole. It's strange how justice doesn't heal everything. It repairs. It rights wrongs. But it doesn't restore what was lost. And in the quiet, I started to realize just how much had been taken from me. Not just money, not just memories, time, years of connection with my brothers, time I could have spent with my father. Untainted by suspicion, letters from my mother that should have guided me through adulthood. Trust, the kind of trust you need in order to let people love you fully. Camille didn't just steal assets. She stole peace, and now, without her, I had to learn how to rebuild it. That process started slowly. My father began asking me about my life, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. He'd call just to talk. Not about the case or the aftermath, but about books he was reading, or old recipes he wanted to try again. Max, now engaged, invited me to help plan the wedding. He even asked me to stand beside him during the ceremony. "I want people to see who my real family is," he said. "Not who pretended to be." Liam invited me to his therapy sessions. At first, just to drive him. Then to sit in. Then to share. I listened as he unraveled his own trauma, the guilt of siding with Camille, the confusion of growing up in her carefully constructed reality. "I didn't know who to believe," he said once, eyes glossy with shame. She made it seem like everything was fine as long as we didn't question her. And I didn't want to lose the family. I didn't want to lose you. But I didn't know how to fight for both. "You shouldn't have had to choose," I replied, but he did because that's what Camille made him believe. I began going through my mother's letters again. The ones I'd found in the attic, boxed up with old photo albums. Each one was a lifeline, written in her delicate, looping script. She'd written to me every birthday until I turned 21. She told me about her dreams for me, about her fears, about the little things. Like how I always bit my nails when I was nervous, or how I once rescued a caterpillar from the sidewalk and built it a home in a mason jar. Her words were full of love, full of hope, and full of warnings. "I don't know what kind of woman your father will remarry," she wrote in the letter for my 16th birthday. "But I hope she loves you like I do. If she doesn't, if she ever makes you feel small or invisible or like you have to fight for your place in this family, remember this. You don't. You belong here. Always." That line stayed with me. "You belong here." It was the anchor I never knew I needed. I started writing back, not real letters. Not ones I'd send anywhere. but letters in a journal. To my mother. To myself. To the girl I used to be. I told her everything. What it felt like to be pushed out. What it felt like to come back. What it felt like to fight and win but still feel like something was missing. I told her I missed her, every day, and that I hoped, wherever she was, she knew that her words saved me. A few weeks after the article came out, I got a phone call I didn't expect. It was from Eleanor Marks, one of Ridge Hill's most prominent nonprofit board members. She was stern, sharp-eyed, and notoriously unshakable. "Elena," she said, her voice clipped. "I've been reading, listening, watching. You handled yourself with dignity. Your mother would be proud." "Thank you," I said, surprised. "I'd like to invite you to speak at the Ridge Hill Women's Leadership Conference. About resilience. About family. About what it means to stand your ground." I hesitated. "I don't know if I'm the right person." "You are," she said. "Camille fooled a lot of people. But you didn't come for blood. You came for truth. And we need more of that." So I agreed. It was the first time I'd spoken publicly about what happened. Not in a courtroom. Not in a living room. But in front of strangers. Hundreds of women gathered in a grand ballroom. All of them powerful in their own ways. All of them with stories of their own. I stood at the podium, heart pounding, and read from one of my mother's letters. I told them about silence. About gaslighting. About reclaiming your voice after someone tries to take it. I told them about grief and how it doesn't always come from death. Sometimes it comes from being erased. And I told them about healing, how it's slow, messy, but possible afterward. People lined up to thank me. Some with tears in their eyes. Some with questions. Some with their own stories of inheritance battles and stepfamily scars. And I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. A few months later, I helped launch a support group in Ridge Hill for women dealing with estate fraud, family betrayal, and legal isolation. We called it the second voice. Because sometimes, when your first voice is stolen, you have to find another one. The group grew fast, and every meeting, I brought one of my mother's letters. Her words lived on, not just in me, but in every woman who needed to hear that they belonged. One evening, after a session, I got a message on my phone. A number I didn't recognize, just one sentence. "You didn't beat me. You turned them against me." No name, but I knew who it was. I stared at the message for a long time, then I deleted it because it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about Camille. It never really had been. It was about finding myself again. And knowing I never needed her approval to exist. I had my mother's love, my father's support, my brother's trust, and my own voice. I was no longer the girl who sat at the dinner table, wondering why no one looked at her. I was no longer the woman who cried in her car after being told her childhood home would belong to someone else. I was Elena, and I had survived. Time moved on. Not in the poetic, sweeping way stories usually describe, but in the mundane, steady rhythm of bills, early meetings, coffee gone cold, and inboxes that never stayed empty for long. Camille's name became a footnote. At first, it was spoken cautiously, in hushed tones, in backyards and grocery store lines. Then less often. Then not at all. Ridge Hill shifted its attention, as small towns often do, toward the next gossip cycle, a zoning dispute, a mayoral fundraiser scandal, someone's teenage daughter caught shoplifting eyeliner from the pharmacy. The silence wasn't satisfying. It wasn't cleansing. It just was. The house grew quieter too. With the lawsuits over, with the article already published and digested, with the attention turning elsewhere, the Everly house settled into a routine that had never existed before Camille. My father's woodworking projects took up more space in the garage. Max's wedding came and went without disruption. Liam adopted a dog, and me, I went back to work. I edited manuscripts, turned down public speaking requests, and quietly stepped away from the support group once it became self-sustaining. I didn't need to be its face. That was never the point. It was always meant to be a structure, not a monument. My brothers kept apologizing, long after it was necessary. We met for brunch sometimes. Other times, we didn't. There was no dramatic healing arc. Just check-ins. Respect. Shared photos of the dog. It was functional point one afternoon. I was cleaning out old email archives when I came across the original scanned copy of the forged will. The one with Camille's version of my father's signature, mimicked down to the hesitation mark in the R. I stared at it. There had been a time when that single page felt like the center of the universe. A weapon. A wound. A thing I would carry forever. Now it was just a digital file. I deleted it.no backup.no fanfare. Just gone. I didn't need to keep it anymore. Camille had built a paper world and tried to hide behind it. But that world had collapsed. And it wasn't coming back. Her last known address was in a different state. She had moved without forwarding contact. Her attorney dropped her as a client. The nonprofit board issued an official report citing misuse of funds and permanently barred her from serving in any fiduciary position with a registered charity. Quiet consequences. Not dramatic. That was the shape of real consequences. No prison sentence. No screaming confrontation. No breakdowns, just exclusion, absenced, silenced. No one stopped her from leaving. No one asked her to stay. In the end, she exited the same way she entered, carefully, strategically. But this time, without applause, at some point, I stopped asking myself why she did what she did. I'd spent years searching for motives, greed, jealousy, insecurity. Wanting to believe there had to be a flaw in her logic, something broken I could identify, point to, and say, that's why. But the truth is, some people don't need a tragedy to justify what they do. They just do it. Because they can. Because it works. And for a long time, Camille's tactics worked, until they didn't. The unraveling didn't come because of my outrage or my hurt. It came because her system had a flaw. She needed people to stay fooled forever. And once we weren't, everything else fell apart. There was no satisfying villain collapse. No screaming headline about her downfall. She simply lost access. The money, the name, the illusion of sainthood she'd built over 20 years. She was erased the way she once tried to erase me. The irony wasn't poetic. It was inevitable. Eventually, the legal team closed the final file. The last of the trusts were updated. The estate rebalanced. The amended deed on the family house no longer carried her name, and no one talked about it much. It was administrative. Necessary, not worth ceremony. In April, my father had his will notarized again. This time, he showed it to me before sealing it in his safe. It was brief. Clean. I was named executor. There was no speech. We didn't discuss it afterward. We both understood that documents mean nothing unless people respect what they stand for. It wasn't about protecting the future from villains. It was about preventing confusion. Removing ambiguity. One morning, Max stopped by with a folder from Camille's storage unit. He'd been handling the final removal of her personal effects from the property. She left a note, he said, handing it to me. Don't worry, it's not dramatic. It wasn't. The note was typed. 2 paragraphs. She didn't apologize. She didn't defend herself. She simply wrote, "Everyone plays the role they're given." I was only ever doing what I thought was expected of me. Maybe that was the problem. I folded the paper once, placed it back in the folder, and handed it to Max. Do what you want with it, I said. It's not mine to keep. He nodded and dropped it into a shred bin on his way out. No ceremony. Later that year, a small piece in the local paper mentioned the reorganization of Ridge Hill's nonprofit leadership. Camille's name wasn't included. My mother's name was mentioned once, posthumously honored for her contributions to the town library in the late 1990s. No1 mentioned Camille again. The story faded, not with anger, not with reconciliation, with completion. It was just done. My brothers moved forward. My father traveled for the first time in over a decade, visiting an old college friend out west. He sent postcards. Never brought up Camille. I took a promotion at the publishing firm. Bought a new desk chair. Started reading more nonfiction. And one day, I walked past a thrift store and saw a vase that looked exactly like the ones Camille used to line the dining room with, elegant, faceless. Expensive for no reason. I kept walking, didn't stop, didn't look twice. Because in the end, Camille didn't break me, she didn't destroy the family, she didn't win. But she didn't lose because I fought harder or smarter. She lost because her story required everyone around her to stay ignorant, and the moment we stopped believing her, she had nothing left to stand on.